Max Strotmann from the cabinet of Commissioner Hahn. You're a long-standing geek here in the European bubble. You've gone through various tenures of different commissioners, always on digitalization, so you're in the best hands for the next panel to discuss with some public policy officials. We are still collecting lots of ideas. So what we'll do, I'll let you introduce your panel, and as soon as you're ready, we'll try to look at some of not only the questions, but also ideas that came in from the audience. And while you're doing that, I'll go fix my Madonna. So Max, the floor is yours.
Dan, thanks so much, and good morning, everybody. I join you up here. Thanks for the nice words, and important that you think about continuing to throw ideas at us, because Francesca did a fantastic brio introduction to the day, and we want to continue this conversation, in particular in the policy panel that is following now.
Yeah.
So I would like, we thought the best is that we invite all the speakers to the panel already, so that we then can listen to Francesca van Huffelen, who will set the scene for the policy panel, and then we go right away in the discussion. So could I invite one after the others already? Minister Alexandra van Huffelen, please, to the panel here. She's the Minister for Digitalisation in the Netherlands. She is a big, important ally for us since many, many years, has a good foundation in local government, and we will hear everything else. I would then like Amandip Gill, please, also to the floor with us. He is joining us from the United Nations SecGen's office. He is his envoy on technology. Great that you're here with us today. Then Bozidar, are you here? Yes, he's here. Bozidar Bozhanov from Bulgaria, joining us, the chairman of the committee of the Bulgarian Parliament on electronic governance and information technologies. And am I still with you? Yeah. And you are a former e-government minister yourself and an entrepreneur. Great to have you here. Stephanie Schar, I make some space here, please, for you. She's the director in DINUM. DINUM, for those who don't know, is an acronym that you need to know because this is the French Interministerial Directorate. So she's the director of all the ministries on digital transformation in the Prime Minister's office. And then, last but not least, and I say this because she is my colleague, a long-standing colleague, Natalia, who is one of our hosts here, Natalia Aristimuño Pérez, director, and I love the title, I mean, you need to invent this, a director of Digital Enablers of Innovation. And this is actually all the funky stuff. It's around data, it's AI, and open source, of course, and interoperability. So busy lady in all the interesting things. And Francesca will stay for us for the conversation. The idea of this policy panel was to continue actually what Francesca has been introducing. I need to pay attention not to fall down here. What Francesca has been introducing to us. And I really like how you ended on the big democracy, because that's, I think, something that we share here on the panel, but you in the audience here and the audience outside. How can we do, this was the idea to discuss here, consider public sector free and open source positioning? Can we discuss, learn here of the first results of the last years on policy making and practice? And let's also hear the maybe negative stories. Where did things not work? Where can we learn from what did not work? But clearly, where can we share what has been working? Cross-departmental cooperation is something that is very important, and Francesca alluded to it, and Veronica in her opening speech in the morning. And cross-border cooperation that is inherent for open source, but how can we strengthen this policy-wise? And something that is very important, I think, to all of us here on the panel is the public and the private cooperation. The public sector and the private sector, in particular startups, innovative small companies, and there we come back to the local level, because this is something that is important for the local development ecosystems in every sense of development, in the UN sense of development. And another quote from the morning, people first. This is something that we would like to see how we can embed this in policy making and policy cooperation. As Dan said, please continue sending ideas and questions to us, because the idea is to have a first introductory round of discussion here. We would like to have the panel very conversational, a good discussion culture here, a collaborative then take a break to take your questions, throw them at our panelists, and ideas. Thanks, Dan, for reminding me. So ideas and questions, throw them, and I will pass them on to the panel here. And then we see how much time we have left before you throw us out and you switch off the lights and so on. But before we start, I'm really super happy, Alexandra von Huffelen, that you are here with us, and I would like you to be invited to the lectern. Maybe I can take this second from your speech saying that you have been a massive help and of incredible importance for us, because maybe you don't know this, but behind the scenes, Alexandra von Huffelen, in her role as minister, as experienced national and local policymaker, has massively helped us to get to what we have today as an Interoperable Europe Act. And I dare say, without your active convincing of others to take the discussion, you're always critical accompanying of what was going on in policymaking at EU level, we wouldn't be there today. So a heartfelt thanks from my side on behalf of all our colleagues. And now the floor is yours for your views from the Netherlands. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maximilian, and you've been too kind. I think it's a great work by many people. Shall we sing happy birthday to the to the OSOR? No, I'm very happy to be able to speak here, and it's super important that we are celebrating 15 years of this community that has not only been very active and very productive in the last 15 years, but is also very necessary in the coming years. I would like to thank the Commission and everybody that I could be speaking here, and I'm trying to make some points on open source, and it is going to be a speech that is basically focusing around how important it is that we are going to continue to work together, but also about how we can maybe work better together in the coming time to be more effective. Firstly, of course, digitalization is all around us. It's super important, and it has become the core to the delivery and improvement of governmental services. We cannot think of government without digital services and digitalization anymore. And of course, the reason why open source is also important is not only because it's everywhere, because also there's an eroding confidence in government, especially also in my country, and that increases the need for transparency. And thirdly, also open source and the broader digital commons are a key element of the conversation in open strategic autonomy. It was also alluded to earlier. This is not only about making better products and services, it's not only around creating trust and transparency, but it's also about our strategic autonomy. And that was highlighted very much also by Francesca in her very lively speech. And this is the reason basically why the Dutch government has chosen to create a policy that says we are going to be open source unless, and this unless comes very late, right? So it's going to be open source as a real. And I want to talk about these two elements today, because our vision on open source is something that I would like to allude to a bit more, and then also talk about the unless part, why there's sometimes a reason not to do it. So why do we want open source? It's basically the essence of our Dutch way of working, which is value-driven digitalization, which is, of course, also the core of the European legislation. We always believe that digitization should reflect our values and benefit society and economy. And the most crucial values that we're committed to is basically, one of them is transparency. We believe that open software is at its core all about transparency, and with open software we can ensure that citizens are able to verify how the government operates, what choices it makes, and of course also how it reaches decisions. And since our decisions are increasingly digital, it is so important that people are able to follow what we do as a government. There is this idea within loads of governmental organizations that we should be closed off sometimes, work a bit in private, see how we do it, first figure out ourselves what should be done, and then talk to citizens. Well, this is not what I believe should be done, because we create a form of mythicism around our work that is actually hampering not only to create better solutions, but also makes it that we are creating distrust because people can't follow what we do. They can't see it. And that is the same with companies. So of course then open source ensures citizens that they, have a view on what we're doing, that they can see how we operate, and that is of course so fundamental to creating trust. Secondly, we also believe that software that has been developed by or with public funds should also be a public good. It was stated in one of the things, public money, public open software, because then everybody can use it because it's been created by public money. When we develop code, we want to be able for people to reuse it, we want to improve on existing open source projects, and we want the improvements to benefit everyone. So open source is about also giving back to the source and society as a whole. And thirdly, of course, we encourage open source because it makes better teamwork possible. By removing the majority of obstacles to collaboration, open source increases effectiveness, efficiency, not only within teams, but also within countries, between organizations, and it facilitates the cooperation within and beyond government agencies and can help to create successful initiatives. And we anticipate that the synergies will have about 1 billion euros annually in cost savings just in our country. So the words that we get back to around our open source policy is transparency and accountability, collaboration, and of course, engaging the public. And as Philip Kahn, the inventor of the camera phone, once said, the power of open source is the power of the people. And this is a very accurate term for this. In order to make sure that we are now going to live up to our own principles of this transparency and open source and reusability, we of course need to do the work. We need to work according to it. And for some people in our government, this term of openness carries connotations of complex technical problems that should be left to engineers. But basically, open source is all about culture. It's about embracing transparency as a core value, being open to feedback, being about reshaping government and reflected, and of course about democracy at its heart. And the reason why it's also hard to accomplish open source, although many of us, and especially probably in this room, do adhere to it, applaud it, are passionate about it, is because it needs a change of mindset, a change of mind shift, or basically a mind shift that can help us to create it furthermore. What we are doing in the Netherlands is basically what many countries and also the EU have done. So apart from setting this policy of open source, we also created an open source program office, an OSPO, which we created within my ministry, but we're going to do it over all the ministries in the country. And we have created an institutional home there for the government for open source. It's been tasked to boost open source, to remove barriers, to be in contact with other governments, so also local and provincial governments, companies and developers. And of course, this organization needs to boost open source, make sure that we're going to do it. And then, of course, we're doing other stuff. We're also created a law that is called the Law for Open Government. And basically, this law enables citizens, journalists, companies, everybody to request information about what the Dutch government is doing. It's a disclosure law. And it's a law that goes very far. In some people's minds, it's going too far, but I believe it's a very good piece of legislation, because it basically says the government needs to open up everything. Yes, of course, there is a bit of stuff that you might not get, but basically all the everything that we produce should be open. And as it relates to open source and the debate, we also believe that the source code of governmental software should be in as well, and it is. So the source code is basically a type of information that you can get access to, and therefore we have acted on this already. So for instance, to give you an example, we have an open source, we didn't do it open source, but we have a government authentication app, which is called DigiD. Many countries have it. It's in order to access safely to work with the government, and we created its open source code, or we opened the code in order to make sure that it was, for the person that requested it, was clear how we created this piece of software and how it's working. And it took us quite some time, because if you have a tool that is not open as in the basis, then you need to really go through it before you can open it up. But we did so. And apart from these two things, we also are committed to have digital commons work for us. I'm very happy to see already here you're working with Mastodon, so that's something that we're doing as well, because we believe also that investments within the European Union can help us to create more strategic autonomy. So we as a Dutch government have set up our own server for Mastodon. We're working in many ways with Polis and with PubHubs, all kinds of initiatives to make sure that we have, separate to the big tech instruments that we can use ourselves, that are open source in the basis and that give us the reason and the possibility to be sovereign. I wanted to end up by saying that other than just these structures and working on the digital commons policy, we're also very much committed to training our staff and to have discussions with the public and with companies. And this is also because of this culture around open source. We need to get everybody on board by making sure that it's not scary, that it's not a bad but a very good thing, that it can help us to be more democratic, more transparent, more open, more trusted, but definitely also it can be a basis for more European cooperation and making Europe more autonomous or sovereign also in this field. And we are therefore strongly committed to it. And we're only saying that if we do not want to be open, it should be just because of very, very strict reasons. So about national security, for instance, or of course people's privacy, but otherwise it's open. In order to fully benefit, I'm hoping and looking forward to the work in the coming 15 years or even longer, although I'm hoping very much also that the work of OSOR is going to be effective already in the coming years, because basically we can't wait very long to be more open, to create these communities anymore. We need to speed up, work together, do it together, and create a strong open source community throughout Europe that's going to help and benefit all of us. Thank you very much, and happy birthday.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Fantastic. Open, ... unless, no? What I think it said, this was the idea, set the scene for the discussion that amongst all of us here, what I noted while you were speaking, transparency and trust, the public sector perspective that is so important for us as a starting point, to have policies and services for the people, built with the people, and controllable, accountable to the people. And that this also, and this I take with me, that this makes economic sense, that we can maybe discuss here amongst ourselves. That laws can help, And Francesca was always saying, oh, the EU and the laws, so this is always this kind of, oh gosh, again. But laws can help, can they? How can they help? How can we design them future open? And what I really liked at the end, all of this should not be scary. And it is less scary the more open it is. So thank you for this. Building on this introduction par force by the Netherlands, we thought for the panel here that we would stay in the beginning in particular at the national level with a view from Bulgaria and from France, before we then move not to the other side of the pond, but just we stay in the same pond that is the pond of humanity, joined with the UN. And then testing with Natalia and with Francesca in the end, how all this fits with the Commission's policy and with academic perspective, if this is okay for you. So I would like to throw the first sort of warm-up, getting to the discussion question to Bozidar. As I said, you are a minister, you are now an MP. You were instrumental for getting the Bulgarian e-government law going. I think there are some similarities to what is happening in the Netherlands. How do you compare with the Dutch perspective? Can you share a few views and insights on the lessons learned, as we said, good and bad, from Bulgaria? Thank you.
Thank you. Bulgaria passed a law on open source in 2016. I was an advisor to the Deputy Prime Minister back then, and I worked on that tiny piece of legislation that I think is very important. What it said was basically when the government procures software that is custom built, the source should be open, not just uploaded once. It should be developed as open source with open licenses, pushed to the GitHub repo repeatedly, etc. Now, you all know the reasons for that, but I'll just go through the 5 items why we did it and why I still think it's a good idea. First is reuse. It was mentioned already that, especially on municipal level, you can build something in the capital, as in our case, and then reuse it in all other municipalities. You can reuse across central government institutions. There's a lot of benefit there. But it doesn't stop there. If it was just reuse, then it may be a shaky argument. The transparency argument. I mean, it's here voted very high by the public money, public code. I mean, that's, as a principle, is a good idea. It also brings quality. And we see that when we introduced the law, and going forward, companies said, well, before we publish it, we have to polish it a little bit because someone will see it. Now, that means that before the mandate for open source, it was not for people to see, implicitly. So it's supposed to benefit quality. The other aspect is the auditability. Because we currently, for example, have a problem with our toll system. The minister recently said the source code is gone. Nobody knows where it is. And we can't audit the system. We can't know whether there is some fraud happening in the code itself. This erodes trust, and that's why we really need to make that source available. And the cost effectiveness is also something that finance ministers would like, for example. One aspect of it is, it's free, because if you procure open source, if you get a Postgres instead of Oracle, then it's much, much cheaper. But there's another aspect, and that's the lack of vendor lock-in. If you're locked into a particular vendor, they, over the course of the years, they will demand more and more to support it, and then these costs add up. So if you're not locked to a certain vendor, then there's more competition for someone to support your open source thing. So for these reasons, we introduced the law in 2016. When I was minister, we tried to rise on the implementation part, so make everyone really abide by the law, because that was not really the case in many institutions. We have a bylaw, we have an instruction saying that in every contract there should be a requirement for open source, and so now for basically every contract by the government there is this requirement. So even if someone's not keeping up to that requirement, we can say, well, it is in the contract. You will not... yesterday I asked the Minister of Interior a question. Well, the EID, the application that you mentioned, is being developed currently, and I don't see the source code in the national Git repo. So yeah, please put it there. It's in the contract, not just in some law somewhere, but it's in the contract. So we also have some reservations from the security agency that say, well, everything should be more secretive. But yeah, this is a philosophical question. I'll end here by noting a word that I think all of you before me mentioned, and it's culture. For technical people like me, I'm a software engineer, these are some soft policy things that may sound a little bit distant. But what I realized that, yeah, we have all the laws, we have all the bylaws, we have the contracts. We don't yet have the culture and the groups of people that would make the implementation really work to achieve those goals. And this is what we have to work, and this is why such events are so great, because they foster that culture.
Bria, thanks a lot. And there was a lot of you couldn't see that, but I saw there were lots of affirmative nodding here when you said implementation, procurement, getting it into the laws, but making it happen and so on. And this is maybe a good link also, by the way, the point that you made on security, because I think here you have something similar with Stephanie, whom I would like to ask next, because I think you also have a security cyber context. Like in Bulgaria, France has a very long policy orientation, a strong business startup ecosystem on free and open source. How do you rate yours in comparison to the Netherlands and Bulgaria? You also, I think I read somewhere that you consider yourself an intrapreneur in the French government ecosystem. So how do you work between government and entities to bridge or to make the connection points and to create this culture that Bria was just speaking?
Thank you very much. So first, thanks for the invitation, inviting France to this panel, and good morning, everyone. So in France, that's exactly, we have a strong tradition with open source and free software around for 20 years ago, I think. And recently, we had two milestones. So first, a circular from our Prime Minister office to promote the use of open source software and free software in all ministries. So it was a strong act for us at the Prime Minister level to establish also how we are organized ourselves to help the other ministries to use software, to see what are the convenient open source and free software to use for the public administration. And we constructing the seal, I will tell it in French, it's the Socle interministériel des logiciels libres, is still existing. And DINUM, so my directorate, is still completed in, and it's a tool for all the ministries. We also have a free software unit in DINUM that helps every day all the ministries to deal with open source software and make procurement, for example, and so on. But more recently, as I arrived myself in last September, so 1 year ago, we worked on a new digital strategy for France. And in this strategy, we put free and open source software as a strong condition to have a sustainable, independent, and sovereign IT system for France, for the state. So it was a big step forward. Our strategy is available in English on our website, numeric.gouv.fr, and we are very proud of it. And now, as was said by the former speakers, we have also to go forward with the culture of all the people that are doing IT in the state, but also to convince all the political makers to think this way. Because thinking this way can take sometimes more time or do it differently, but we think this is a good way to have a stable basis for our IT system in France. So I can give you a few examples. For example, in France, we operate in DINUM free software basis encrypted instantaneous messaging. It's based on matrix protocol. And we operate also web conference, webinar, so different tools that are all based on open source. And then we try also to contribute to this open source. And I think we will go back to that further away. So most of those tools, they are in the digital workplace for the civil servants, but also when we create tools specific for our government, we do it open source also. So like it was said, it's also for us a way of transparency to have this open source software. I would like to finish with welcome the recent progress on the interoperable European Interoperable Act. I think it promotes these reusable blocks that we can use in open source. And we see also in France having open source software is a way also to interoperability, because as the code is open, we think it's very more easier for IT makers, also outside from the public sector, from the private sector, to cooperate and add some, give some added value and promote some other tools. So we have some example today of what we did in France as common, digital commons in open source software, like GeoTrack or Démarche Simplifiée. I think we will go back later on those examples. And as a community for the cultures, we have this community Blue Hats that promote in all ministries, yes, with the blue hats, that promotes this culture of doing differently, but we think in a sustainable way.
That's cool, thank you. Actually, I have a blue hat, but I wanted to bring it, but on the bike in the morning, I didn't dare doing it. I might have lost it. But it's not only blue, but I might also have gotten red ears, because thank you so much for, and also to other speakers, for the kind reference to the Interoperability Act. We might come back, I think, Natalia, to this. But this was an immense project for us, and you and other partners around here helping us to carry it. Actually, 1 year ago, I wouldn't have thought we would be there today, so we are here. Yeah, but listening to you now, and I would like to turn to Amandeep and zoom out of Europe in a way, what has come up on the cultural side, on the values, on the societal choice that the public sector is investing in every sense, time, people, effort into free and open source software. In our conversation over coffee, I think we felt that the values between Europe, the European countries, and the UN are very similar. That's lame, that's a pity, because if we agree too much, it's not very good. But if it is good for the commons, how can you make this happen? How you push this at global level? Can you agree with that? And how do you do that at the global level?
Thank you, Max, and congratulations to the European Open Source Observatory for entering the teens. Many years, productive years ahead. The values question is very important. I believe open source reflects the United Nations values of inclusion, of collaboration, what the Secretary-General calls digital cooperation, of transparency, of democratization of opportunity, and increasingly sustainability. So all those values are aligned across the open source community from the bottom up with the UN's own approach. And how do we bring it together? So we have a vision for a global digital compact next year to be adopted at the Summit of the Future. And one of the 8 themes during the discussions on the Global Digital Compact has been global digital commons. So how do we build these digital commons that Francesca and others have referred to? I think open source is really the foundation. And it's interesting how there is now several demand pulls on open source. One is the increasing attention being paid to digital public infrastructure. So the stacking up of open source, digital public goods, and their combination into these digital innovation ecosystems, which are the reality of digital public infrastructure. So we're shifting our mindsets away from hard infrastructure to this softer infrastructure, driven by examples of successful deployment in Bangladesh, in India, Rwanda, Estonia, closer to Brussels. Whether it's the stack approach or it's the use case driven approach, that's the way to bring more people into the digital economy. Bridge the last mile gap in terms of citizen services between the public sector and citizens. So that's one demand pull. And the other demand pull is interest in civic tech and gov tech, communities solving their own problems because they know their context the best. They have data that fits that context, makes sense, and then using open source and that innovation ecosystem around open source to solve those problems. In the UN, we call this the localization of the SDGs effort. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the 17th one being about partnerships and where open source matters, but it's also about the localization of that effort. The SDGs agenda is not going to be impacted by 6 or 7 players, but 6 million, 7 million startups, 70 million startups, they can move the needle, they can get us closer to the goals for 2030. And that's where open source plays such an important role.
That's cool, thanks. I like the ancrage that you do in the local communities, and that this is something that empowers the local communities all over the world. This very much resonates with me. And the second one, it's interesting that you stress the infrastructure, because curiously, for legal reasons, our Interoperability Act actually is based within on the base. We need to find a legal basis in the treaty for the European Union, and it is actually an infrastructure legal base. So we say what we are doing is we try to create a pan-European infrastructure, and this is something in our view that should not end at the Europe's borders. So the reaching out across borders is very important. But do you see any particular sort of red lights flashing, in particular in this cross-border aspect, stumbling points or risk points where maybe we from Europe and the UN could join forces?
Yes, of course. There's a lot of competition internationally, geopolitical competition around technology, and people are afraid that their data, their digital resources can be extracted, misused. So they're shutting down on interoperability. And I think open source and interoperability, again, there's an interesting synergy there. So we need to keep data flows, trusted data flows, protected data flows open. And I think that's one of the red amber lights that's there. And I think there is another demand pull, which is flashing different colors at different times, and that's coming from AI. Artificial intelligence doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens with digital public infrastructure, whether it's publicly owned, privately owned, the data flows, the data empowerment, data protection frameworks. And here the infrastructure is becoming more like techno-legal infrastructure. The interpenetration of data protection, data empowerment into how the flows happen. And then if you get that right, this is technical, financial, legal, if you get that right, then the magic of AI happens, the scaling happens, etc. So there, I think we have a concern, which is that this debate is being reduced to a binary between closed models and open models, and risks are being projected without a kind of clear notion of the larger public interest at play, which is not only the important issue of harms, but also the issue of equity, fair, competitive marketplace, sustainability, transparency. So there are other notions that ministers and public officials have to think about in terms of the public interest. So there several lights are flashing, but I think we have an opportunity to build some collaboration around it, taking advantage of the discussion on AI, the AI advisory body of the Secretary-General, the Global Digital Compact discussion, and what we've been since last year when we started this work on open source within the UN. How can we connect the OSPO efforts around the world. So Bangalore, Baltimore, Barcelona, Buenos Aires, these are names I'm not just taking randomly, but cities who've been leading on some of these issues. So how can we network them together in this network of digital cooperation so that we have all these kind of geopolitical trends and these difficulties around technology, emerging technology, but at least there is this net of collaboration at the community level which helps us get to those global digital commons.
Thanks, Amandeep. I see with you there is traffic lights flashing, but it is not all red and not even very orange, and there is a lot of green coming in, and this kind of cross-border cooperation effort, structures that we can build together on OSPOs, on individual projects, is something that is very dear to us. And then I can link to you, because when you mentioned AI, Natalia next to me was nodding, because within the Commission she's also in charge of the AI effort together with others. It's a community effort. Now you hear a lot interoperability, data, open source, the national, the global level. Do you feel comforted with the Interoperability Act and what is happening?
I cannot surprise you with my answer.
Voila, I wanted to hear it.
No, it's great, and as it was mentioned, I think the link interoperability and open source is a very, very nice link that reinforce one each other. So I think this is really a good thing that we are moving forward. So yeah, I think that it has already been mentioned, but openness is culture, is mindset, and all these we need to put all these elements together. And if we look a bit at the past, okay, we are in the birthday of 15 years, I think there has been already a lot being done on interoperability and open source. Openness has been part of the e-government action plan that was there to foster the e-government agenda in the member states. But also, well, now we have the regulation on the European, the Interoperable Europe Act, but this is not something like completely new that pop out just there. But we also had the European Interoperability Framework, and there you could already find the openness as one of the key principles to implement interoperability. And as said, this is a question, it's not a technical discussion, or not only a technical discussion. We are there talking about the way we do things, which is, I really like the collaboration net that we have. This is part of what we have to change. It's a mindset that we need to bring, where openness is put forward for everything, meaning the way of working, the sharing and reuse, because I think this has also been said several times. It's not only the fact that we just open, but we also reuse. We have always this kind of principle that, it's better if I do it on my own, myself, and very close. But in fact, the usage of open source means that not only you don't need to invest in something that is already existing, but the investments you planned for doing that, you can invest them to improve something. So at the end, we all benefit because we will have a better, much better solution because we put together all these investments. So this is why this mindset is so important. But also, there were reference to the private sector. So, and I think that there is also this partnership. We have the GovTech, CivTech, but also, there was mentioning, okay, it's public money, but in fact, by investing in open source, so giving it this, we create economic value also out there. We can have companies that can benefit of it. And I think this is also something that we are, working. We still have some I think 15 or more years to go, but we are really, and I can see already this change happening, as it was also mentioned by Francesca. And now we engage with the SMEs to give them access to what is available on, being it HPC or other algorithms for AI. AI is indeed, I would say, a challenge and an opportunity. Because we see, okay, we all see what's coming with AI, but you also said, okay, which are the principles behind open source? We talk about collaboration, transparency, trust. Well, I think if we look at the challenges that are coming with AI, those are things that we have to work on. So if we combine open source and AI, I think that we will go further in a more trustworthy environment. So I think those are really key elements that we are working on together.
Cool, thanks. Can I jump on one point and maybe play it back to Francesca, what she said in the opening? One point that you added that very much at least resonates with me, and I think with many in the community here, is this public-private. And there was a lot of conversation here. I mean, this is the creating local ecosystems. All of you come out of a public-private history in a way. It makes economic sense. To me, it makes theoretically total sense. But is it really happening? How far? Francesca, do you have any more insight in that? You mentioned the procurement aspect. This is something that is very dear for us, that we manage to break open public procurement for smaller companies, which doesn't mean that I'm against the bigger ones, but not only the bigger ones, that we help stimulate this. And then maybe afterwards to Alexandra, building on that, on the cross-border aspect. It's very nice if we have this in our local, in a city. Now, you were both working on the local level. It's great to have it at the city level, but can we stimulate it cross-border? Sorry, so throwing one question to the two of you.
Yeah. So I think I'm also going to focus a bit more on procurement. I mean, now it seems a bit strange to make such an unsexy topic as procurement a bit more sexy. No, we should. Yeah, we should. So I have to say, when I was Chief Technology Officer of Barcelona, I think I worked like 1 full year just on how do we get this stuff into the contracts. And it was said before, because otherwise I didn't have any leverage. I felt like I was missing any tools to actually be effective. And I mean, and we saw how it was important, because procurement in public administration is about 60–70% of the overall investment. And also, I think it was really a duty for our citizens, because citizens pay taxes. And it was mentioned the question of trust before. And in exchange, they need to receive those kind of services back, but also with sovereignty built in. I mean, basically, if they pay taxes, the citizens own that software. They own that data. Yes, because it's basically paid by taxation money. And this is, is a bit about the principle open code for public money, public code, but also I think it's going also a bit beyond, because we need also data sovereignty and data portability, open standards, privacy by design. So we need a set of principles. Now, I think to put it in procurement is not so easy as it looks. So I'm going to say this very straightforward, because we also have to discuss what's not easy. And also, when we did it in Barcelona the first time, we did, the open source and free and open source software part, but also we added data sovereignty clauses in procurement contracts. We did it. So we actually did it before understanding a bit the implication. So because I was a bit like, we need to act. So yes, we did it. And then the companies were like, we are not giving you this data. Actually, in the public administration, many times the public sector was receiving data in a kind of like PDF. Not even machine-readable format that you can consume for AI. Nothing like that. And so the companies were like, okay, no, we refuse to give the data. And I was like, sorry, it's in the contract. So you actually have to do it. So I'm making this example because I think it's a lot about changing also the relationship between the public sector and the technology providers. It has to be a win-win, it has to be a partnership, and it cannot be a lock-in, and it cannot be an obsolete business model. So we have to grow both sides. This is very important for me. And then, you know, when you talk about collaboration and also using more investment, I mean, also let me make another example. Open, not enough. I mean, we know it in this room. And also, for example, open data is not enough. For example, now the work very interesting I've been doing with the city and the state of Hamburg was to get private provider data shared with the public and then managed in a data trust and open for innovators. I mean, this is really tough legally, so this legal techno arrangement, we have to get it really right. And sometimes it's not clear. I mean, you try, please. Go, I mean, you have tried, I'm sure. They will tell you, no, we can't share the data because of privacy reasons and because of trade secrets. Now, I put together a pool of some of the best lawyers in Europe with good mind. I mean, lawyers that want to help you. I mean, not the lawyers that tell you, not the lawyers that tell you no, because, no, because this is a very important part of public administration. I mean, I will insist this is not about just the techies. I mean, the techies, as we saw in Bulgaria, they get it right most of the time. But then you go to the procurement people and the lawyers, and that's where you get like, no.
And this is if I can jump on this one very much, because our colleagues from DG Connect have been suffering over the Data Act, and some of you have been maybe following this for exactly these reasons. And what I like also what you say here is this kind of public sector experimentation approach that is not much embedded in our cultures as public sector, but also not in the public that gives this leeway to the public sector. And I think this is something very important, that we start being more self-confident about saying, hey, we try out things. And if it doesn't work, well, okay, we try something else. But we document it, we make it publicly accessible.
To be nice with the lawyers, because now I said
but
all the
I would like
problems
to
with the lawyers.
also Alexandra's view on that.
I have to say there are some lawyers which actually really, and we have competence, a lot of competence in Europe that actually really get it right. So what I told you about privacy and trade secrets, they are not an obstacle to data sharing in the public interest. It can be done preserving privacy and preserving trade secret, but at the same time, maximizing public interest. This is what we need to get right. And I just let me close by saying like one, I think, important thing, because it was said before, which goes in the direction of experimentation. And this is also a cultural problem sometimes. It's like, in particular, sorry, a bit in Germany. I mean, now we have different cultures. It's like, it has to be by the book, like the law first, and then we see if we can do it. We need to experiment because we need to innovate and see what works, what doesn't, and scale it. And we need examples in Europe.
And learn from each other on this.
Learn from each other.
Sorry, Francesca, if I can just jump in on this one.
Here examples that work, stories, software, services that people can say, wow, this works, because otherwise we are not going to convince
And I don't
people.
mind even if things don't work, if we speak like adults about it and say, hey, it didn't work. But because this is something and sorry if I'm impatient, because what I wanted to build on here is that, that Alexandra, you and your team have been pushing very much, and now I want to go beyond the local level or the national level, this GovTech cooperation. You have been really advancing this very much, and where this kind of experimental approach, saying a group of countries, we come together, let's try it out. You've been pushing. Your reaction to that, your lessons on that?
Yeah, so the point is that basically we're all convinced that we should do it, and that we should experiment and show good examples. I like the good examples part, I like the experimentation, but I find it far more important to have it really based in legislation, because I'm not a lawyer, but I do believe that we need it, because then we can also really make sure that it's going to work. But now we need to enforce the laws, right? So we need to make sure that it's going to be in procurement regulation, that we're going to follow up with the regulators that are going to look into it, and make sure that this is basically the way of working. And the reason why I'm pushing it also on a cross-border level is because I'm sure that all the people in this room have some kind of an example where they can say, there it worked with us, and there it didn't work, and here we're facing this cultural problems. Because I am sure, and it was also mentioned by you from your experiences in France, is that this cultural thing is the real blocking, the real blocker. Yeah. So it's not only legal people or people from procurement who sometimes also have very good reasons to be scared about this. One of the discussions I had this morning was about, so how do I know then what this project is going to cost if I'm going to do it open source, which is an important example. But also I truly believe that we really, really need to make sure that this is far more in a mindset of also people like me, who sometimes are scared of transparency, because as soon as something goes wrong, they hit your head off, which is okay. But, you know, I can be very open. We have elections tomorrow, you know, I'm not going to be in. But now, the thing is that, so we have to make sure that it works the other way around. That if you're secretive about what might go wrong, then your head gets hit. They can take your head off or do anything else. But, you know, so that is what I like very much. The idea of working together is because I'm sure that we together can accomplish much more. So these meetings are also super important, and it's super unnecessary. Maybe I'm talking because I'm from a very small country, but basically, if we do not share our experiences, we're not getting anywhere, because then we're, you know, being closed within our borders, which is something that I don't like. And especially also I'm very happy that Amandip is here, because this is also a UN thing, right? This is not only about Europe, and it can't be about Europe. It is for part also about the strengths of Europe as a regulator and the strengths of Europe as an autonomous or sovereign entity in the world. But we can't do it without, well, basically a global approach. Yeah.
This resonates. Yeah, please.
Jump in on the procurement part, because it's very interesting, and actually the crux of the problem. We speak about startups, we speak about partnering. The problem is, and I have had a startup at some point, startups nowadays, and rightly so for business reasons, strive to the software as a service model. Whereas the government, even if we use software as a service, it's kind of risky to use it from a startup. It's hard to actually budget it because it's OPEX rather than CAPEX. So we have these complications, and that's why an open source model where you can self-host the product, but the startup, the company offers it as a service to their business customers is the thing that I think would work. And one example from Bulgaria, our central platform for public procurement actually comes from a startup. I think it was from the Netherlands even. And we bad about this in this company. And we got the code. It's in our public open source repository. And at some point, the company got acquired by a bigger company, and they shifted the model to software as a service only. So if we didn't have the code, our public procurement platform would be dead in the water. So it's very important to think about these models and the way startups actually structure the business model. Because if the government relies too much on SaaS without having access to the source code, at least as code available. In some cases, it can be legally impossible to get it as a proper open source with licenses and everything, but at least code available is very important for the sustainability of the government systems.
Bria, thanks for this, because I was a bit worried before when Alexandra said about the cutting heads off, because my head will be cut off if I don't bring in the questions and ideas that we have from the public. So there's always a risk for somebody here. But then in the end, the discussion moved already to addressing some of the ideas. I don't know whether you see it, but we see it here. We have sort of from Slido a number of questions and ideas. And one of the things that I picked up here that came from the audience is the question of investing jointly, and also something around the EU budget. But sort of that, and this I find picks up very nicely on what you just said, sort of how do we go about these procurements? How do we stimulate and create it? And maybe to go to Stephanie around this, sort of what you do interministerial and what Bosnia has now presented, what we came before, how can we do this cross-border, the joint investment, using EU funds, using national funds? How do you respond to that?
Yes, thanks. So I will take an example that is an example from this year is AI, so artificial intelligence, because in this topic, we have to work together, all departments from the different ministries, and we can spend a lot of money if we don't mutualize. So what we created in France is an alliance also with private sector, but also research and administration that have either data or the wish to go further with artificial intelligence to help civil servants for more efficiency in the public services and so on. And we put two conditions for all the community in this alliance. First condition is open source, so we there implemented our own strategy. And second condition, to develop experimentation, so experiments, we told about that a few minutes ago, with use cases with impact. So what we are looking for is impact on efficiency of public services, so better state, in fact, and transparency due to open source software, but also autonomy due to open source software. There are some large language models that are now in open source. So what we are doing, in fact, is not exactly procurement. What we are doing is working on it and operating by ourselves in our own infrastructure. And then, of course, there can be some services, and we work with companies that help working on that. But we all working on the same open source basis that we improve, in fact. So this is also another way. You told about entrepreneur. Maybe I explain what is this. Entrepreneur, in fact, is like entrepreneur, but for a state startup. And in France, for 6 years, we developed this kind of way also. So we don't say chief of product or product manager, but we like to take this name of entrepreneur. That means that we go in this experimental way with agile method and so on. And so we do it that way also in this example.
Yeah.
And just last thing, what we are developing in France, so we think we need state-of-the-art open source products, but if we really want to have products that stay state-of-the-art, we have to have a large community behind. And so we will be very happy to work with other members to know which open source basis they use for civil servant, digital workplace or EI. So two tracks that we are following. And so it's a call also to the community that is here that we would like to go further with cooperation. It's a future, I think.
Super, much appreciated. Maybe this is really to come back to Amandeep on, because also sort of ethical AI is something that is very important for you, and this kind of call or this openness that Stephanie and I think others on the panel also said here, we are ready to engage, including in open source models for AI. How will you afterwards call them and say, yeah, please join? Here is the call from the United Nations.
Well, certainly I hope that comes out next year when these important processes conclude. I think if you look at the risks and the challenges and the opportunities and the enablers together on AI, then open source has a very important role to play. If we are worried about immediate short-term risks like bias, discrimination, exclusion of communities, and misinformation, disinformation that can undermine democracy and societal trust, then we need more eyes on the code, on the model. So we need more participation. Whatever be their intentions, we can't just leave it to a few people. Not only to tell us that it is all safe, it is all good, don't worry, but also even to understand the technology. Because today you have a situation where most governments don't have the capacity. Most universities don't have the capacity, don't have the human resource. Even universities like Stanford are saying, we are struggling with infrastructure around digital. We are struggling with understanding the pace and the direction of change of AI. because we haven't invested in public tech, we haven't invested in our public institutions, we've underinvested in them. So I think for those reasons, we need to have open source. And you see very encouraging examples coming up. Hugging Face, Eleuther AI. In Europe, there are some examples of people who are making a commercial success of open source foundation AI models. So creating kind of new versions of what we've seen with GitHub and other kind of platforms for sharing, collaborative development, and lowering the entry barriers to innovators, to researchers from more diverse areas. Because there is also an equity issue. In the UN, we say, leave no one behind. So why should this amazing, exciting technology be only the preserve of a few? So I think but of course, with eyes open, even with open source, we've seen misuse with open source. So we need guardrails. We need monitoring and discipline. We need regulators to actually police and monitor some of these things. And open source also has licensing. So what kind of requirements go into the licensing when the AI models are used? Because it's actually going to be an ecosystem value chain with different kinds of players, with different incentives coming in at different times. So we need to really up the game in the open source community in terms of safeguards, risk assessment, interaction with, this has been anathema sometimes for the open source community, interaction with government authorities and regulators on what could possibly go wrong. So we have to raise the bar even within the open source community.
This is very cool because open eyes is easily said, but it's much easier open eyes if I can share my half eye with somebody else's half eye, and together we have one eye already. So also this is actually a collaborative effort, the openness. And I see that lots of eyes are open, but just let me just 1 second. We have there's a timer that says now it gets red. We have 59 seconds, but we have been negotiating before, and somebody told me, which is super dangerous, to say, you can make a few minutes more. So Dan, don't smile so nastily, but let's do that. Because on this investment thing, and then we come back to a final point, on this investment thing, to Natalia saying this, investing, the joint effort, the going beyond the local and national level, this is something that is very much behind the idea of interoperability solutions, open source-based solutions that are publicly available. No, that is part of the main. But this needs joint investment from not only the EU budget, but also from national and local budgets.
It's not only investment, but it's also the willingness of sharing and being open. And I would say, okay, this was the purpose when the open source observatory was built. And it's not only about observing, but I mean, if you want to observe, you have to have something to observe. So there is where we have the need of putting forward these solutions that have been built here and there, that we can really access. And so this is part of the observatory, but I would like to mention with the regulation that will be soon adopted, this will become, like a legal requirement, because we will have the interoperable solutions portal, where we also will build an interoperable label, so you can also even have more trust on what will be put forward there. But this is something that is not only a one-way direction. We need all of you to feed this portal with all the solutions that are there. So this is why I say it goes beyond investments. It's about sharing and putting all the information together.
Thanks, Natalia. And now everybody here was smiling because there was a blinking red light. So it says over, and you all want to have a coffee and you want to carry on the discussion. So we thought actually to end this here. I had prepared questions, and there was no time for all these questions to end it here. So maybe we can really just make the typical closing thing for each of us. Quickly, a sentence of your choice. But in particular, what do you hope we will be celebrating in 15 years when we will meet again for another thing here? So,
shall I start?
Will we be celebrating?
Yeah, I think two things for me. So one, I really love the UN call for a global digital commons. And I think, please, this is an agenda where we should all be part in. And really, this is the alternative to this big tech, big state, polarization, which I think it's excluding the majority of the population and the public interest. So if this agenda becomes real, fantastic. Second, sorry, very quickly,
No, I'm just saying,
a call
yes, I
to
like
member states, because I think we are seeing how this digital industrial revolution, it's different. We can't compete only member state with member state, and I still think it's too in isolation. So we have France, Netherlands, Germany, Spain, everyone is kind of like collaborating a bit, but not enough. So this can only happen at a European level. So we need to get it right, and I think we are not doing enough there.
Super. Alexandra?
Also with investment, obviously, also with investments.
So basically, to have created this big democracy, so we have basically taken back control over our digital lives. That is something that I like very much. And I truly believe that there is a great role for the European Commission and the European Union to play. So yeah, let's put money together, all together, to make sure that we have that. But I also very much believe, and I'm going to hand mic to my neighbor, because the United Nations is of great importance here as well, not only on the topic of AI that you talked about, but also on these issues around having the control. I mean, we've seen in the last few days the craziness about OpenAI and Altman. It's really, really not a world where I would like to live in continuously, a world being run by just a few companies that basically decide for us how we rule our lives. So that would be my dream. Oh, you have
then I'll have to. I think we'll surely have something to celebrate in 15 years, and I hope the celebration is around the role that the open source community would have played in helping us tackle the twin transitions. Francesca, you mentioned those. Building these global digital commons to solve the pressing challenges that we have: agriculture, food security, and the green transition, education for all, health for all. There are many, many challenges out there in the global south, and they will not be solved by a few people. You'll have to have more inclusive parts. I hope we can celebrate it at that time. And definitely, most important perhaps, I hope we can celebrate that we managed to keep our societies open, democratic, based on the rule of law, respect for diversity, inclusion, all the great values that the European Union is built on and that the UN Charter has.
Yeah, I hope we will first celebrate our ability to give more answers. For example, to one of the questions over there about office packages. Because the answers should be more than, we should work on that. Another thing is that I hope we'll celebrate that we have better organized our software ecosystem with better governance models, with less of a chaos in each organization, which types of technologies are used here and there, and that will celebrate the clear business models that will allow us to answer that question. Open source with software as a service for some customers, source available for government and large enterprise customers, with clarity and really working business models around open source rather than them being the exception.
I will be very short. So my wish is that in 15 years, we use in our daily life in public sector some open source, some free and open source software considered as digital commons. And so it responds also to one of the questions.
Yeah. Well, I would like to ask you to do something so that we can celebrate in 15 years. We will see. We have the hours this afternoon. We have talked a lot about Europe, about UN or the global digital aspects. We have talked about the values that are behind the open source, but then why we have always the solutions which are quite, how can I put it, individual or on a given country or region or so. So I give you the challenge that in 15 years, the hours will be with solutions that have been built together, that we have cross-border solutions that are not reused, but really built from the start with this cross-border collaboration.
Thank you so much, all of you. I have a very humble wish for 15 years. If ever I will here, I would want to have more time, please, for the discussion. And then I saw the Microsoft and Google another question, but I thought then we are here in 15 years. I hope by then we will have solved some of these things. Let me end on this, and I loved my panel here. I thought it was brilliant. If you allow me one sentence, is something saying, it gives me hope that the public sector in digital in the biggest sense, has a particular convening power that we have in the past not seen, but that today here with all of you I have seen. And this is a convening power as a contributor, as a buyer, as a challenger of lawyers and of techies, but also as a bridge maker to businesses, to business environments all over the world, regardless where we are, for something that is indeed a broadest sense of digital commons, because it concerns us all without borders. This is super naive maybe, but this is on a naivete, a hope on which the UN was built, on which Europe is being built. So I'm super hopeful for that. People first. Thanks to all of you.